Even when you're hungry, never move like you're starving.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily podcast on fantasy basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball podcast brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball. Another season preview ready for you guys today. We're going to be looking at the Charlotte Hornets, a team that's got a little bit of a change to their team and of course to their head coach. So to talk about the Charlotte Hornets, I am joined by the host of the Locked On Hornets podcast, and that is Walker Mehl. Walker, welcome to the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. Thanks a lot.
Going to be talking about this Hornets team, Walker. There's quite a bit for us to get to here. So
let's get to it.
All right, the projected record for this team, Walker, in the time-honored tradition of the Locked On podcast hosts going with the over. You have gone with the over for the Hornets at 40 and 42 above the Vegas total of 35.5. They are clearly in the mix to try and get a playoff spot this season, with the Cavs most likely dropping out there. You've gone at almost a 500 record for the Hornets. What's the reason there? Is it the optimism of a new coach? Is it the removal of Dwight Howard? Is it internal improvement? Someone like Miles Bridges, perhaps a change in rotation? What's your reason of the optimism for improvement for this team?
Well, I just think when you look at the roster, it just seems more talented than what they were actually able to produce last season. You look at what happened the last couple of years, 36 wins the year prior, 36 wins last year. And Steve Clifford at the time had said that this was the most talented roster that he's ever had since being in Charlotte. It just seems like there was a little bit more to be desired from the last couple of seasons, and the over-under from Vegas was 35.5. So they're pretty much projecting them to be right at 36 wins once again. I just have a little bit more optimism because I do think a new voice is going to make a change. I think Steve Clifford is a good head coach in this league. I was a fan. But having James Borrego come in, it's going to be better for a new voice to come in. I think there is going to be a faster-paced offense that he's been preaching the entire time here. I think these guys are going to buy into that. I think that maybe the message with Steve Clifford with a few players had certainly ran dry with a couple of guys. Like Kemba Walker had a great relationship with Steve Clifford. So did Marvin Williams, maybe a couple of the other veterans. But I think maybe some other guys it was hard for them to buy into Steve Clifford's pretty demanding defensive philosophy. And James Borrego is a good defensive mind, and he preaches that they're going to play defense. But I do think that he does bring just a different mindset that's going to help this team. So on top of the talent, you do, at least as of now, have the all-star Kemba Walker still on this team who does so much. I do think Borrego is going to be able to get more out of Nick Batum than what Steve Clifford did, at least the last couple of seasons, which he's been very disappointing and one of the worst contracts in the league. I think Borrego is going to put him at the 3, maybe put Jeremy Lamb or Malik Monk at the 2. And Nick Batum on Twitter, he came out and he said that 3 was his natural position anyway. So Nick Batum, it seems like he's a guy that might like this coaching change, might like the role that he has within this offense. So getting the production out of probably your second overall best player in Nick Batum, obviously having the all-star Kemba Walker. Jeremy Lamb really came on strong last year, was one of the few bright spots in a disappointing season. I do think Malik Monk is going to improve. I think it's going to be a guy that has a very good jump from his rookie to sophomore season, where he couldn't get on the court under Steve Clifford until the end of the season when it was all said and done. I think Malik Monk is going to have a real role on this team. So those are just a few reasons for my optimism where, it's not crazy optimism. It's still a little bit below 500, but certainly above the over that Vegas has the Charlotte Hornets set at.
Look, I give you shit about going with the over, as nearly all the hosts do, but I do agree that the Hornets will go over that 35.5. You made a couple of good points there with the faster pace that Borrego is likely to install with this team. That's key for these guys and their overall fantasy numbers, so that's something to take into consideration as well. You talk about Clifford being a good coach, but he was, I believe, unnecessarily restrictive on the young guys on this team, like just completely just not letting Malik Monk play basically at all, because he was young. Like, no other real reason for it. Yeah, didn't even send him down to the G League team, really. He played pretty much the entire season with Charlotte, but sat on the bench for 70 games or so. And that's not a really great thing for his development, when he could have been getting more of an opportunity over some other guys because he was so hard on the defensive stuff. But you're right, Monk did take that step forward at the end of last season and really started to show that he was able to be a contributor in the NBA. The projected leading scorer you've got for this team, Walker, is no surprise. It's Kemba Walker, who led this team in scoring last season, 22 points per game, 5.5 assists, almost 3 threes. He was a guy that had that reputation of not being able to shoot for quite a long time, but he's been able to hit the threes at a significant rate and been over 40% for the last couple of years from the field. He was the 30th ranked player last season, so I have absolutely no idea why on Yahoo he is ranked as the 12th best player. That is nonsense, and you should not be looking at drafting him in that spot, but I think he's a solid back-end second-round guy, started the third round in that 24 to 28 type of a range. Is there any reason that you could see that Walker would be improving significantly on what he did last season, or does it just feel like at the age of 28, the last year of his current contract, that it's just going to be more of the same from Kemba?
We talk about this a pretty frequent amount. I think what you've seen from Kemba is going to pretty much be his ceiling. If he improved this season, then I guess I wouldn't be completely shocked. But it's not a guy that's going to go out there and improve to 25 points per game, still shooting 40% from three. At least it would be hard for me to see him have that much of an increase, especially, again, being 28 years old and making that kind of improvement. I think that would be a little bit too much to ask. But the bottom line is the guy, to me, is a legitimate all-star. It's certainly an NBA league. It's a league where the point guard position is as deep as hell, and I believe Kemba Walker is a legitimate all-star in the Eastern Conference. The guy's gone there 2 times now. I think he'll be an all-star once again this season, of course, with all the West getting all the talent. But I do think he'll be back, and I think it's somebody that's going to see very similar numbers to what he had last season, and probably, I would imagine, ranking around the same spot that he finished. So I think under James Borrego, we talk about the fast-paced offense that they're going to instill. Kemba Walker's been working a lot at finishing at the rim this offseason, and that's something he and Borrego have talked about quite a bit, where you're right. He and former shooting coach Bruce Kreitzer did such a good job and had such a strong relationship where Kemba was able to shoot over 40% from beyond the arc, when a lot of people would look at that percentage coming out of UConn and they would stay away from him a little bit. But all the credit in the world goes to Bruce Kreitzer and Kemba for putting in the work. But now they're gone, and here's Borrego, who's still, of course, going to value Kemba Walker's ability to shoot from beyond the arc. But when you look at Cleaning the Glass, of course, the website that eradicates all garbage time stats, yep. And it looks, it's pretty good merit in behind these stats. You look at the efficiency in which he finishes at the rim. It was good his second season, but then it's been dwindling down again ever since. And Kemba wants to improve that part of his game. So I think that Kemba is going to be more efficient finishing at the rim this season. And maybe that could give him an extra point or so in the points per game category. But I think just for the team's overall success, you're going to have to get more from Nick Batum. You're certainly looking for more scoring opportunities from Malik Monk. You're going to get, again, Jeremy Lamb is a guy I do believe is going to have a decent year. Marvin Williams is probably going to finish at the same. You're probably having other guys kind of average out to what they've always been in their career, but you do have a couple of guys looking for increased opportunities, so that might take away from Kemba Walker's scoring opportunities. I think you're probably looking at a very similar year to what he had last year, and in Charlotte, we'll take it because he's a legitimate all-star, but that's probably what you're looking at for 2018, 2019.
There's a couple of guys on this team who do enter the season with some level of injury cloud, but I think all guys are going to be ready to start the preseason. Malik Monk suffered that thumb injury, which was a fracture, and then somehow not a fracture. Devontae Graham suffered a knee problem in Summer League as well. Both those guys are going to be fine for the preseason, aren't they?
Yeah, it looks like they're going to be good. And Devontae Graham was a real scare. So Malik Monk, it was a scare at first, but again, it didn't affect him like his ankle did last season, yep. Where he missed the entire summer. That was killer to Malik Monk. You talk to anybody that looks at these rookies coming out of college, trying to make that jump to the NBA, that summer in between is just huge. And the fact that Malik Monk not only missing out on Summer League, but missing out on the entire summer to get ready for regular season, it killed him. And you thought Devontae Graham might be experiencing a similar thing in that regard when he had what looked like it was a very weird injury that we never heard of before. It was a condylar lesion. Everybody was looking up WebMD to see what the hell this injury was going on with Devontae Graham, and sure enough, eventually it would be known that he did not need surgery. So we were all, wiping the sweat off of our forehead that he didn't have to have surgery. But Malik Monk is going to be ready to go, especially after the misdiagnosis. And Devontae Graham, after showing a lot of good things in Summer League,
he looked good.
Second-round pick that Mitch Kupchak, he did. Mitch Kupchak trading up in the second round to go get him. He was impressive. At least Charlotte fans are really excited. And looked better than Miles Bridges, by the way, for the first few games that Devontae Graham was healthy. So Devontae Graham getting back from that injury, it looks like they're both going to be ready to go and hopefully contribute. Even Devontae, the second-round pick, even contribute in the regular season in some sort of fashion.
At this point, Graham is probably the third point guard behind Tony Parker and Kemba Walker, and Malik Monk played a ton at that position as well. So I don't think he's going to be an every-night guy, but when Parker suffers the inevitable injury, he's going to have an opportunity to step up. And I do think he's an interesting deeper league guy, and I do like him long-term for dynasty-type purposes, because next season both Kemba and Tony Parker may not be on this team. That's a legitimate possibility that people have to be looking at, and not saying Graham's going to be necessarily ready to step into that role, but that is something that could happen with this Hornets team for next season. As for Monk, I don't think that, we can talk about this now, Walker, I don't think that he's going to be starting on this team, just because I think a Monk-Walker backcourt that's going to have some significant defensive problems, but he's going to get a significant chunk of minutes. I think he's going to have a chance at a top 150, maybe even top 120 type of season. He really came on at the end of last season and was running things. Yeah, granted, there were significant players who were sitting out down the stretch there, but he showed an ability to start taking over games. His last 6 games of the season, 17, 16, 21, 26, 22, and 17 points. There was an 8-assist game in there. He was generating steals. He even had a 3-game stretch of 4 block shots in those 3 games, putting up some pretty interesting numbers down the stretch. When finally he was given an opportunity to play more minutes, the efficiency was pretty decent as well. So that was 6 consecutive games and 8 out of 9 games where he hit at least 2 3-pointers. Sorry, my mistake. At least 3 3-pointers in 8 out of the last 9 games of the season. He probably won't have that exact same role, but we have to assume that Monk is going to be playing a much larger chunk of minutes this season than what we saw last year.
Look, James Borrego gets this job coming into this team, and the one thing he made clear at his introductory press conference, trying to make sure that he had the fans and everybody else on his side, he attached himself at the hip to Malik Monk, constantly mentioning him with any kind of outbreak for this sophomore season that he's going to have. I mean, he's mentioned Malik Monk a lot, being a huge part of this offense. I think you have to buy in. Now, you're probably right about him not starting. I do think it's a good possibility. I wouldn't say it's probable. I would probably put Jeremy Lamb at the 2 if they're going to put Nick Batum at the 3. But I do think Malik Monk is going to have a big impact on this team. And if that's starting, probably, or if that possibility, but if it is starting, then fine. But probably coming off the bench, what Malik Monk has shown you is he has an ability to get buckets. Even at the beginning of the season, when Steve Clifford was playing him at least for the first month a little bit, Malik Monk showed you in that fourth quarter against the Milwaukee game, against Milwaukee at home. I believe that would have been in November sometime.
Yep,
he got like 19 points. Yeah, 19 points in the fourth quarter. And that's something right off the bat. Malik Monk is going to be able to get you buckets in bunches. And he really worked on his efficiency at the end of last season. And look, you and I agree, I'm sure as everybody agrees, Steve Clifford was way too slow to get to Malik Monk at the end of the season. Even if you thought his defense was so bad that you could not play him, you still got to him too late with the Charlotte Hornets just being out. And Steve Clifford's coaching for his job at that point. He's trying to make sure that he's winning these games now because, he's got to try to save onto his job. And I get that. But at the end of the day, Malik Monk should have been playing earlier. And I think we can all agree. At least he did show you something at the end. You went through the numbers. He did work on his efficiency as well. Like even just getting the points, like you can look at, the 20-point outputs sometimes and they're just not efficient. But, with these type of guys that just kind of put shots up from everywhere on the floor. But Malik Monk has shown that he can be efficient as well. I think Malik Monk is going to have a good jump from his rookie to sophomore season. And Borrego, again, has mentioned him countless times ever since getting this job here in Charlotte. So he's bought in, the fans have bought in, and I've kind of bought in to what Malik Monk has the potential to do in his sophomore year.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see what he's going to do. I think he's a worthwhile flyer with a last pick in a standard draft. Now, the other guy who is, I guess, has some sort of an injury cloud over him is Cody Zeller, who missed chunks of last season, had that knee injury in December, which cost him all of the rest of December and all of January, and then he didn't play again after the 8th of March. At this point, he is the projected starting center. They do have Bill Hernan-Gomez, and they do have Bismack Biyombo there, but I think Zeller is clearly the best of that group, and he should be pushing up, if not at 30 minutes, but a little bit below that. He's a guy that is not the best fantasy contributor just because he's not a high volume guy. He needs really, really big minutes to be a contributor, but he can be an interesting type of guy in this role. He is efficient from the field. He shoots decent free throws. He blocks shots at a decent rate. He's very much nothing spectacular and with limited upside, but I think we have to assume that he's going to be the starter. But is there any update on that issue that kept him out at the end of last season, or is he ready to go?
No, I think Cody Zeller's ready to go. There hasn't been any issues as far as holding him out at the beginning of the regular season. No buzz whatsoever as far as any injury significantly holding Cody Zeller out, at least at the beginning of the season. Now, this is a guy that needs to prove that he can stay healthy because the last 2 seasons he just simply hasn't been. And one stat that was thrown out a lot here in Charlotte 2 years ago was the fact that the Hornets went 3-17 in Cody Zeller's absences. And you could tell how valuable he is to this team. And then last year they bring in Dwight. So that diminishes Cody Zeller's role even when he was healthy. And I think a lot of people would argue, and including myself, that this team probably just ran better when Cody Zeller was out on the floor rather than Dwight Howard being out there on the floor. So Cody Zeller is going to be important. And again, if we're going to talk about this fast-paced offense that James Borrego is going to implement, Cody Zeller fits that as good as a lot of centers in the league, to be honest. And Cody Zeller can run the floor really well for his size. It's a guy that tested obviously extremely well at the combine, having one of the best verticals when he was coming out of Indiana. So the guy is very athletic. It's not about if he can stay healthy or not. And I think he's a decent enough defender. I think he's mobile enough on the perimeter to at least help you out a little bit on some hedge situations. Now, Cody Zeller is going to help you in that facet. Now, fantasy-wise, you're right. I don't know how much value he has in that regard, but as far as helping you win ball games, Cody Zeller is going to help you when healthy. The one thing I'll say that is a little bit interesting to see with Billy Hernan-Gomez is in Summer League, Hernan-Gomez got a lot of run, played really well, but the one thing I think to take note of from him is his ability to hit the corner three.
Yep.
And Cody Zeller doesn't have that in his game right now. What you saw in Summer League was Billy going to that corner and being a decently consistent corner three hitter. And I wonder if there's any situations where Borrego wants to put more shooting on the floor, where he wants to space it out. Maybe he wants to space it so Kemba Walker can drive to the hole to work on that efficiency at the rim. I can see Hernan-Gomez going in there and trying to clear some space, and maybe Kemba kicks it out to him, and you can hit that three. And that's one thing Cody Zeller does not have in his game, despite the Hornets been working on it the last 3 years. So that would be one thing to watch. But for the most part, I would imagine Cody Zeller having the biggest role among any of the big guys of the three that you mentioned earlier.
Zeller's ranked as the 311th ranked player on Yahoo. He'll comfortably beat that, but it doesn't mean that he's necessarily a 12-team guy. You mentioned Hernan-Gomez and hitting those threes. He was doing that. But they've also got Frank Kaminsky who can go in and play that role, even though he does struggle significantly as a center. He could still get some playing time there as well. We've looked at the breakout guy, which is Malik Monk, you've mentioned. We'll have a quick just detour to the two-way guys. There was two of them. One was Mangok Matiang, who was waived. Now they've only got JP Makura, who played during Summer League. I don't really see much in terms of him as a player, so I don't think we need to focus too much on him, Walker. But let's just talk about Borrego and what he could potentially be doing with this team that's different. We've talked about the increased pace, but Steve Clifford was very much big on the rebounding and defensive portion of the game. Where does Borrego's, I guess, philosophies lie? Will he be attempting more threes? We've talked about the pace. Will he be easing back off crashing the glass, that sort of stuff?
Well, I do think Steve Clifford did try to adapt as far as shooting more threes as he went on. Steve Clifford, kind of an old head in this league. I do think that he was able to adapt a little bit. But the one thing I will say that is a pretty much a carbon copy between Borrego and Steve Clifford's philosophy is their desire to make sure the rim is protected. And I think you saw that with Borrego in his little stint that he had at Orlando as the interim head coach. He would put some guys down there to try to make sure that the rim was protected. And Steve Clifford obviously made sure that was a big priority here in Charlotte. The Roy Hibbert experiment, it didn't work out, but the ideology was the same. Bringing in Dwight Howard, that was the ideology of trying to protect the rim. And James Borrego has spoken about it and did a pretty good job. And I think it was just the 20 games that he had there in Orlando. But that was something that both he, Borrego, and Clifford shared. And, it's interesting when you're looking for a new guy, oftentimes teams will go the exact opposite of what the previous regime was doing. So it's not exactly like you're getting that here with Borrego like you see in a ton of instances. For instance, if you have a coach that's just too hard on the players, then you're going to get a players coach, and then you go back on that end of the seesaw back and forth as a franchise tries to hire a new head coach every time. But I don't think you really got a crazy opposite end of the spectrum guy here in Borrego from Steve Clifford. There's going to be differences. You mentioned the threes. Borrego is certainly going to shoot more than Steve Clifford did, I think. I would hope, at least, and as much as Charlotte Hornets fans as well hope, that they're going to defend the three a little bit more. The Hornets were decent at hitting them. They just couldn't defend the three. And I would imagine Borrego is going to put an emphasis on that. So those are a couple of the emphasis that James Borrego is going to implement with his new coaching style. But interesting, again, to me always, that it's not a guy that's just completely opposite of everything Steve Clifford did. There are some things that are similar, but there's going to be some things that Borrego tweaks to make this team better. And I think a lot of people are excited about the hire. And it's hard not to be excited about a guy that comes from Greg Popovich's tree, where not only is there just any kind of merit in being under Greg Popovich, but you look at some of the guys that have come from him before, and they've been successful on their own. So a lot of people are excited for Borrego to come into this team.
Now, I asked all these hosts, who's the most likely player to be traded, and you basically said anyone except any of the first or second year guys. Right. Just quickly, the likelihood of Kemba Walker being traded, because that could severely impact what his fantasy value is as he goes from being the man on a team to maybe being a second option on a stronger squad. Do you think that he does get moved? We heard Michael Jordan emphatically deny that possibility last season. Is that something that's going to stick this year despite his contract being up at the end of the year?
Yeah, Michael Jordan coming out basically saying that if the right situation comes in, then he would do it. But then eventually, making sure there was an interview after he said that, saying, well, it would take an all-star and another asset to come in favor of him in return in order for us to deal him. And so basically Michael Jordan said something but really said nothing. Like, of course, every GM has their price for a lot of players, and Kemba Walker also has one. Now, I think what you've seen with Mitch Kupchak coming in as the general manager is every move they've made has been a move to win this season. They've gotten some second-round picks, but they knew they had to get Dwight Howard out of there because of some locker room problems, which I don't think were crazy, but maybe just players were a little bit displeased with him. But they got him out. I certainly think it made them a worse basketball team just because of the flow of the game. It just didn't work for a winning type of basketball. And so now Dwight Howard's out of it. But you see Mitch Kupchak, trying to, at least he gets Mozgov in that deal, and then he trades him to Orlando, and it's basically the same contract, but Bismack a better player, than Mozgov, even though it's probably not by a whole lot. Like, every single move you've seen from Mitch Kupchak, I think you look at it and they're all in for this season. So I don't think they're going to trade Kemba Walker before the year. I think what you could see from him being traded is if it doesn't go well at the start of the season. So let's say you get to December, if you get to January and things are really running dry, things just aren't working out, then I think you almost have no choice but to trade him. If you wanted to bring him back and commit to him long term, then okay, fine, but is that a risk you're willing to take, losing him for nothing, while this team, with Kemba Walker as the lead dog, still outside of the playoffs looking in, at least up till that point? So if the Hornets are struggling by January or certainly before the trade deadline, and the Hornets don't look promising going towards the end of the season, then I could see Kemba getting traded. And a lot of these guys, whether there's somebody that's hitching a ride with Kemba, whether it's an MKG who's willing to take on that contract, and I doubt Nick Batum, anybody would be willing to take on that contract, but possibly if he has a good half of the season and they want to ship him out with Kemba, then maybe. But, I think there's a possibility if the Hornets struggle out of the gate that Kemba could be traded, but I think that's what it's going to take. I think it's going to take a bad first half record.
in the draft, they had pick 11. They traded that to the Clippers and then got back pick number 12, which they turned into Miles Bridges. We've talked a little bit about Bridges already, and he did struggle somewhat in Summer League. Of course, he does come in with established players in front of him with Nick Batum. Dwayne Bacon played a lot last season. You could put him at the 2, but there's Jeremy Lamb and Malik Monk. If this was Steve Clifford, we'd just say, well, we're just not going to see Bridges really play at all this season. Do you think that, I'm not a massive Dwayne Bacon guy. Do you think that we're going to see Bridges be able to leapfrog Bacon and move into that backup role behind Batum, or will they be looking at Michael Kidd-Gilchrist there? I think there's a legitimate chance, Walker, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that Kidd-Gilchrist finds himself out of the rotation at certain points this season, if they're going to go with Marvin Williams and Frank Kaminsky as the 2 power forwards, and if they're going to go with a Bacon-Bridges combination to back up Batum. I think it's going to be hard for Kidd-Gilchrist to find those minutes, or will he be in there and that's going to leave Bacon and Bridges both on the outside looking in?
No, I think you're right. I think MKG might have a hard time trying to find his way into the rotation with James Borrego coming in. I mean, if shooting is an importance of James Borrego, then MKG is one of the worst shooters in the league. So it's not somebody that helps you in that regard. Now, Borrego has made sure that we've talked about that they're going to play defense. He's made sure to hammer that home as well. And MKG is a good defender, but Miles Bridges is at least praised for his two-way play and somebody that can come in and contribute right away. When they traded away Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, I thought that was a bad move.
Yeah, same.
Here's a guy in Kemba Walker who you might trade, who certainly could leave at the end of his deal if he wants to go back home to New York, or maybe there's an opening that Brooklyn wants to get him, and maybe he goes to Brooklyn. Who knows where he goes? He could stay at Charlotte, but there's a good possibility that he leaves. And I felt like the Hornets traded their point guard of the future when they drafted Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And SGA was linked to them in a lot of mock drafts, and I don't think anybody was surprised when they picked him at number 11. And then the surprise came in when they finally dealt him to the Clippers, and then in comes Miles Bridges. I was shocked, and I still am. I think Miles is a guy that doesn't really have all that high of a ceiling. I think Miles Bridges is somebody that can come in and help right away. I think it's somebody that can probably defend a decent amount down low. I see him more as a 4 than I do a 3, to be honest with you. And I just think, Jalen Rose always talks about you're all in this world of positionless basketball, right? Like the only reason we give you 1 through 5, it's all about who you can guard. And so if we're talking about who Miles Bridges can guard, then I think it's more of the 4 than it is the 3. I just think he struggles a little bit laterally to keep guys in front of him. And you saw that in Summer League. So if you see him more at the 4, that's fine. I think that works better for him. I think that might give other 4s some problems, but that's where I think I see him. So I'm interested to see what that whole entire lineup of Marvin Williams, of MKG, of Miles Bridges, of Frank Kaminsky even. I think Frank Kaminsky could be a guy on the outside because he doesn't play any defense. So it's going to be interesting to see how Borrego handles all of those guys, not even just the 3 in MKG, but the 3 and the 4 position is going to get interesting in how Borrego uses them. And with Bridges coming in, supposed to help right away, I think he will get minutes, and I think he'll take away from one of the 3 other guys that has gotten minutes the last few years for Charlotte.
That 4 position's a disaster in terms of trying to work out the minutes. There's Marvin Williams, there's Kaminsky, there's Kidd-Gilchrist, and if you're going to throw Bridges in there, that's just another name to add to that mix. So I think you're going to have none of those guys, Williams or Kaminsky especially, being fantasy-relevant players. Right. Marvin's a guy who people really seem to like for fantasy. He has these up and down moments, but still last season he played 26 minutes per game and he was the 151st ranked player. He did start to really bump it up at the second half of the year. The 3s came in, but I just don't see him playing 26 minutes per game. And he's already 32, so an extra decline could be coming on. Maybe the shot falls off, and maybe he's just not able to stay on the court that long. So I don't see he's one of the lowest upside guys you can look at the end of the draft, and you shouldn't be looking at low upside guys in that area. So maybe even if he has a return to form, what does he become, the 130th best player? And that's absolutely pointless in that sort of an area. But I don't think that Kaminsky's going to be getting enough playing time, or Kidd-Gilchrist to really have any impact. So I think that Charlotte power forward position is just going to be a disaster when we're looking at it from a fantasy point of view.
No, I absolutely agree. As far as if you're looking for the production in fantasy, I would stay away from all of those guys, to be honest. I mean, we even talked about Cody Zeller. As I'm sure as you have to talk about on your podcast all the time, there is a difference between being a good fantasy player and, maybe sometimes being a good basketball player without contributing in the box score that gives you points in this league, right?
Yeah, like Zeller's one of those
Cody
guys. Zeller's those guys, one of the biggest discrepancies in the NBA, I think.
Sure, absolutely. So Zeller's one of those guys, and Marvin, I believe, is up there as well. Here's a veteran that does help you defensively. Steve Clifford would constantly praise Marvin for his team defense, and you hear the younger guys on this team, how much Marvin is a mentor to them. He gets the media award every year. The guy is just a joy to talk to, and his ability to hit from three the last, I guess there's been 2 years in Charlotte where he shot over 40%. Yep. And it's really helped out this team. And so, there are different things like that Marvin can help with. But if you're looking for a guy to draft in fantasy from the Charlotte Hornets that's in that front court, it's certainly going to be tough to find anybody within that 3 to 4 position with, Borrego trying to figure out what kind of lineup he wants to throw out there. It's going to be tough to find any value.
Well, let's talk about some guys who do have some fantasy value. We'll look at your projected starting five. You've got Kemba Walker, Jeremy Lamb, Nick Batum, Marvin Williams, and Cody Zeller. That's the exact projected starting five I have for this team. The two guys we haven't really touched on too much here are Jeremy Lamb and Batum. So let's talk about Jeremy Lamb. He's being drafted at pick 147. I think he's a top 100 type of a guy this season. Clifford had his issues with Lamb, and he would unnecessarily punish him, I believed, at times, despite how well he would play. But he is a guy that can be quite streaky. He can have these really efficient nights and then completely drop off. But what he is a very strong rebounder for a guard. Decent steal rate, hits threes at a nice level. The scoring, I think, will go up this season. I think I can see a pretty solid role for him where he can become a top 100 guy. And if he does push to 32 or 33 minutes, which I don't think will be the case, but if he goes there, then we're talking about a top 70-ish type of guy. And he is a guy that I would be all over in those last 2 or 3 rounds of a draft. I think he does step into that role. He's 26. He's right in his prime. He doesn't have to deal with the Clifford issue anymore that did plague him through the early parts of his Hornets career. I think it's a big step forward for Lamb. Even if Monk's going to get minutes, even in 28 minutes, if Lamb is that's what he gets. And he can play the 2 and the 3, and he can play alongside Monk. I'm expecting a pretty big year out of him.
Oh, well, Jeremy Lamb, I think that's we talk about the front court lineup that Borrego's going to have. I think that's more of a kind of like a negative connotation when you're trying to figure out how to play those guys. I think you kind of have some positives to work with in the backcourt, especially I think you have some nice comparisons with Kemba Walker, Malik Monk being shorter and having Jeremy Lamb and Nick Batum trying to help you out at least in the defensive end with being a little bit longer. Jeremy Lamb's arms, they go for days. And that was one thing that Steve Clifford did get upset with Jeremy about, was he would make a bonehead play on offense here and there, but he just looked disinterested sometimes on defense. And I think that changed. I think finally Jeremy Lamb took a big step up, and Steve Clifford rewarded him for it last year. He got 26 minutes per game last season. It's somebody that, again, you went through the numbers. I mean, it's somebody that was way more efficient. That three-point shot really improved. I mean, here in Charlotte, we did not see Lamb's ability to hit from beyond the arc. He was somebody that shot 30% and 28% in the 2 years previously. Last year, it goes up to 37. And you'll take that all day from Jeremy. And it's somebody that has not – the NBA maybe has gone away from the mid-range game, but Jeremy Lamb certainly hasn't. And he's been efficient hitting it. That runner is money. Anytime he gets in the paint, pushes it up with his one hand, you're constantly thinking it's going to go in. It's a shock if it doesn't. I think Jeremy Lamb does have a lot of value going forward this season. And James Borrego, as far as him attaching himself at the hip to Malik Monk, of course talking about Kemba Walker because he's the star on this team, mentioning how he's going to help out Nick Batum. He was sure to mention Jeremy Lamb and how he is a playmaker for this team. So I do think Jeremy Lamb is somebody you can look having some value going this season. And it took him a little while to blossom, but I think you did see him have a very good year. Again, last year was disappointing for a lot of Charlotte Hornets fans. Not a bad word said about Jeremy Lamb, and that was one of the few things good I think you could look at last year.
He played under 25 minutes per game last year and was still the 125th ranked player, so I don't understand a Yahoo situation where they're ranking him at 147. It makes no sense. We've already talked about Batum moving over to the 3, which would make more sense given it's his position, so that opens up a spot at the 2 there, and Lamb is, even if he doesn't play 30 minutes, he's going to get more than the 24 minutes he saw last season, and that's going to elevate that ranking higher than where he was last season. Let's talk about Batum though, because people look at him and he was a little bit disappointing, but he was still overall the 84th ranked fantasy guy, and that is dealing with an elbow injury that kept him out at the start of the season through preseason. and clearly bothered him through the early portions of the season. But over the final 40 games of the year, he was the 66th ranked guy, which is getting closer to what he was in 16-17, where he was the 47th ranked guy. But he also played 3 fewer minutes per game during that stretch. So basically, his numbers over that last 3 months were almost identical to what he'd done on a per minute basis the year before. So if the playing time goes back up, which is no guarantee, if the elbow is fine, which we assume it is, a full preseason, he's not quite 30, but will turn 30 during the season, so there's some concern there. But he is a guy that generates assists, he gets steals, he rebounds well, he hits threes, he's a perfect rotisserie guy, contributes right across the board. The field goal percentage is somewhat of a problem, that is true, but just contributions right across the board. And I think, he's going to be that perfect mid-round type of a guy. And people are looking at last season and really discounting him for that. You have to take into consideration that he had this weird elbow injury, which we thought was going to cost him months of time. He ended up getting back, but still bothered him for a considerable chunk of the year. And I think that that's going to lead him to surprise some people this season.
Nick Batum is such a weird guy to try to figure out here. I think when he played the one good year at the beginning of his tenure here in Charlotte, he got the big contract. He would have gotten it anywhere else because the franchises in the NBA were just losing their minds, throwing money at everybody. But Nick Batum had a very good season with Charlotte. And even then, he only shot 42%, 43% from the field. I mean, it wasn't anything crazy special efficiency-wise, but you could tell how much of an impact that Nick Batum had with this team. And then the last 2 years, it just seems like Nick Batum is always good for 2 bonehead turnovers a game. There are some plays that Nick Batum makes that defensively that you just leave you scratching their head. There's every once in a while that he just, again, he leaves you raising an eyebrow, leaving the game at what Nick Batum does sometimes. But as far as fantasy goes, you're right. I mean, he checks off a lot of boxes, not emphatically, but there are a lot of boxes that he checks off. 5 assists a game, 5 rebounds a game. You mentioned that he is able to get a couple steals here and there every once in a while. He does score double digits. The field goal percentage, it is a problem. Like, it's not anybody that's been crazy efficient ever since he came to Charlotte. And really, the second to last year that he had in Portland was the best year he's had, and efficiency-wise, where he shot almost 47%. He hasn't shot above 42 since 2013, 2014. So it's part of the reason why I think Portland was ready to move on from Nick Batum, was that the next year after that, the guy was shooting 40%, only 32% from 3, went under double-digit points per game, and that was the first time that had happened in 6 years. And Charlotte and Steve Clifford and company, I think they did a good job at somewhat of a reclamation project for Nick Batum. The last 2 years, it just hasn't been there for the Charlotte Hornets, and there's a lot of angry fans that this guy is making the $26 million that he is and not contributing like it. I do think that there is some merit into the elbow injury that you're talking about. And one other thing that I think Nick Batum said that was interesting was he wanted to focus wholeheartedly on the Charlotte Hornets' upcoming season last year, and he did not play internationally with France. And he said he was going to give his entire 100% attention all to Charlotte's franchise. And now this year, here we are, speeded up to a year later, here we are now. Nick Batum says he thinks that hurt himself. He thinks that not playing internationally with France and all those guys that he always enjoys playing basketball with, that hurt him heading into last season. I don't know if it was just him trying to shake off some rust, and then you add the injury into that. It's kind of a perfect storm for Nick Batum, but it was somebody that he counted that as a detriment to his game. And this year, it was somebody that really wanted to embrace that again heading into a new year. So I do think that you're going to see a better season from Nick Batum. There are some things that he needs to work out, but I do think fantasy-wise, I do think just straight-up basketball-wise, just as far as winning basketball games, I think Nick Batum is going to be better. I think Borrego has a hand in that. I think the injury has a hand in that, or a lack thereof. And I think just an overall better demeanor from Nick Batum has a hand in that. So I would agree. I think you should look at Nick Batum having a better season in 2018 to 2019.
Him moving up a position also should help as marginal increase in blocks, an increase in field goal percentage, and an increase in rebounds. I think you'll see those numbers come there. He's been the Hornets' leading assist guy for the last couple of seasons, more assists than Kemba Walker pretty much every season that he's been in Charlotte. I think it has been every season he's been in Charlotte. So I think he's a great value. His rank on Yahoo is 105. That is a brilliant value, I think. Lamb at 147 I also like quite significantly, while Hernan Gomez is at 321. Now, I don't know exactly how the minutes are going to shake out, but in a deeper type of format, I am 100% confident he is going to beat that number. I've got no doubt about that. He is a top 200 sort of a guy, so in 14 and 16 team leagues, Billy is definitely someone to have a look at there, where I've already mentioned a couple of guys on the negative side of the ledger. Kemba Walker at 12 is too high. As much as I like Kemba, that's too high. And Marvin Williams at 119, there's zero upside in taking him with one of your last 3 picks, and he probably doesn't even get back to that level. Walker, that'll wrap us up for this Charlotte Hornets team. We've covered all their guys, all the value that could be here for fantasy. But before you go, first of all, can you let people know A, where they can find you on Twitter, and secondly, which would be B, what's going on over on Locked On Hornets?
Yeah, man, we appreciate it. So you can check out the show at Locked On Hornets if you want to follow us on Twitter or check us out there. We'll always put out a link of each show we do every day. So again, at Locked On Hornets, and you can find myself on Twitter at Walker Mehl, a couple of guys that I work with the podcast, at Doug Branson, LOH, at Nada the Scribe. They also help out with that podcast each and every day. And it's a real fun show. We like to have a lot of fun, but also, of course, make sure that we do and make sure we put out all the information that you want heading into the regular season. And what we got going on right now is it's fun. We're doing, since it's the 30th anniversary of the Charlotte Hornets franchise, we're counting down each episode the top 30 Hornets of all time. And not necessarily the best players, but just the 30 Charlotte Hornets of all time. So we've been doing that in the dog days of summer, going through that with the 30th anniversary that the Hornets are undergoing right now. And we're going to get ready. I think Hornets Media Day is going to happen sometime in mid-September. And once that starts to get rolling, we'll get all the audio from there and start to really hit the ground running with this new season about to come up, I guess, in mid-October with their opening night game against the Milwaukee Bucks. So a lot of good things going on. Again, if you want to follow us on Twitter, we'll put out a link each and every day at Locked On Hornets, and it'll be a fun listen.
Make sure you are checking out Locked On Hornets and that top 30 players. I'm very interested to see where my man Kendall Gill will come in that list. We'll check out exactly how that goes down. Go and subscribe to Locked On Hornets. Subscribe to this podcast as well on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and on YouTube. Give us 5 stars. Give us a thumbs up. Leave a comment. Tweet at us. You know all the story. Walker, thank you once again for coming on and talking about the Hornets with me.
Josh, I had a lot of fun, man. I appreciate you having me on.
All right, guys, we are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya. Miles Bridges.